Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dyken, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. The next entry in the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds interview series is from Chuck's chat with Brian Wilson's engineer, Larry Levine. Larry's the man responsible, side by side with the Wrecking Crew, for building Phil Spector's Wall of Sound. His peak accomplishments include Be My Baby, Summertime Blues, River Deep, Mountain High, You've Lost That Lovin Feelin, He's a Rebel, Then He Kissed Me, A Christmas Gift for You from Phil Spector, Pet Sounds, Smile, and so many others. Alpert and Jerry Moss poached Larry from Gold Star in 1967, making him A&M Records Chief Engineer. Larry passed away just a few years after this interview in 2008, which makes this posthumously released Chuck Chat yet another priceless buried treasure. Here are just a few of the many things that Larry discusses with Discograffiti in this podcast. The early days of Gold Star and working with Phil Spector, the Phil Spector session that became the turning point in his working relationship with the producer, how Larry created the very first echo chamber, and an in-depth overview on how it developed over time, Larry's assessment of Brian Wilson's overall character, how Phil talked about Brian to Larry when Brian wasn't around, and his relationship with Chuck Britz. Here it is then, Larry Levine.
When did you first meet Brian Wilson? Do you remember?
During one of Phil's sessions. They had been coming in before they had been successful even. They came into Gold Star. Again, they worked with Stan. I can't recall the year now. I don't know why. I think, of Brian coming in with Phil. But they had been doing demos and other things with Brian's dad producing it, probably before they got signed by Capitol.
Right, or probably right around that time.
Yeah. And I had done some things with Brian, and I got to tell you that, as far as I'm concerned, one of the great tragedies of life is what happened to Brian. Because if people deserve what they get, Brian totally did not deserve what he got, because he was one of the greatest, nicest, unassuming people before the drugs thing.
And you can tell, when I listen to session tapes where he's directing the session, and he just sounds like such an affable, down-to-earth, easygoing guy,
Yeah, he had no ego, of note. He didn't antagonize people. He was just a good kid. It was just such a shame that happened, because he deserved all of the good things that life can bring. And I won't forget that Brian was one of the really good people around.
And pretty amazing musically for someone who really didn't have a lot of, formal music training.
But that's true of so many people. Yeah, if you've got it, you've got it. I think there's something inherent in people who have that. Phil didn't have much musical training either. Maybe that's the reason why, rather than in spite of. They didn't have all these rules that they had to abide by. So what they created was natural for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what was your impression when you first worked? You did some work early on with Brian, right?
Yeah, they were demos. Well, again, I really liked the kid. It's funny because until I mentioned it just a moment ago, that I don't have any recollections of what was going on before. It was when Phil came in, he adored Phil. I mean, Phil was his idol. And as I told you when we spoke the other day, Phil is really a champion of people who are deserving, and he really takes out against people who aren't. And so he would always run some real big diatribes about Capitol not making Brian the producer, having another producer, when Brian did it all, and Brian deserved all of the credit and all the money and everything else that went with producing. Then Brian, as I said, when he came in, Phil would put him to work. If there was a piano around, he was playing a piano. Most anyone who was an artist who came in to one of Phil's sessions ended up in the studio doing something. And Brian loved it. I mean, he would show up anytime Phil would let him, which was, I guess, anytime he wanted to. But I only did, actually, well, I guess I worked on Pet Sounds somewhat, but I did one record with Brian, which was Be True to Your School, because he did everything with Chuck over at Western. So he wanted to do something at Gold Star, and that was what we did. And the Pet Sounds, again, that was at a time when I was making this transition, so I don't know what was going on. I don't remember much about it.
I think one of the things I really need to bring out, and of course it's totally positive, is this, influence that Phil had over Brian. Because, when you look at what Brian began to do, it was all inspired by Phil, at least from the production.
He wrote a song for the Ronettes that Phil didn't do, but you could tell it was a Spector kind of song because Phil wrote himself. I guess he didn't want to do outside stuff at that point.
Right.
But it was a big record for them. Don't Worry Baby.
Oh, Don't Worry Baby, yeah.
Don't Worry Baby was written for the Ronettes. Brian told me, and Phil didn't want to do it, so they did it. But you can tell it's that kind of song.
So would Phil ever talk to you or just comment on what he saw in Brian? I mean, what really, turned him on about what Brian was doing?
Oh, wow, you kidding? He would go on for 10 minutes at a time telling me, without Brian being there, if the subject came up for one reason or another, on how great the things Brian was doing and how little recognition he was getting. As I said, he would rant and rave. Well, who was producing, who was A&R, getting his name on it. But,
right.
But Phil would really get against him. He would really say, he's got no right in Capitol, got this because Brian is doing all these great things. He loved what Brian was doing, and I'm sure he feels the same way I do about how much Brian deserved to be living a good life.
Yeah, it really is tragic, the course that Brian's life took.
It's a great American tragedy. I mean, as I said, he was such a good person that he's deserving of a good life. And there are a lot of louses around who have a good life that aren't deserving of it. So, yeah, Phil was, the two of them, really had a good rapport. It wouldn't work coming from one side and not the other. Phil is either a great friend or he's a terrible enemy. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground with Phil. All the people who would show him some disloyalty for whatever reason, were always Phil shitless from then on.
All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's Patreon episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 4 weekly episodes. That's Friday's free episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound episode, which showcases Patreon members and the Elephant Six world, your Monday bonus episode, and your Wednesday early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of that Friday's show. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 6-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/discograffiti.